What's up, hobby friends? My name is Casey and welcome to another miniature rescue. I'm changing things up this week because I decided I am absolutely not going to give up on this old rescue project. This video is sponsored by Flexispot, but more on that in a little bit. Miniature painting is fun. There are so many aspects of the hobby that continually draw me in and make me want to keep buying new minis and painting. New techniques to learn, new games and avenues to explore, and minis that need to be rescued. The thing is, the way I like to hobby tends to put me in somewhat of a small box. An enjoyable box, but one that doesn't lend itself to growth very often. And growing in the hobby is something that I never want to give up on. I want to continue to push myself, and it's something we should all be trying to do in one way or another. Today, I sat in front of my mini cabinets, totally unsure of what to do. Didn't have a plan or a model in mind to start working on, but I always know that when I sit down and look at the models I have that are ready to be worked on, something is going to stick out. Something about an army or some detail of a single model stands out and I get excited about it. A few months ago, I made a video about a particular Black Templar model from Warhammer 40k. This Emperor's Champion was purchased on eBay with the Golden Demon painting competition in mind. Now, I'm not what you call a display painter. I've always been much more of a get it back on the table kind of person, and if I can make it look good in the process, then I'm pretty happy to do so. But pushing past the hurdle of tabletop standard is something that I don't really reach for very often. As I sat and pored over my collection, contemplating the possibilities for the next few weeks and what video I wanted to make, something kinda dumb occurred to me. The box that I'm putting myself in is pretty thin, and a construct of my own doing that is the culmination of all the things that I tell myself when it comes to miniature painting. I really don't want to be in that box anymore, and I think it's time to finally push my way out and try and do something with a mini that I was ready to give up on. I bought this model to do something with, and to share that experience with other people. Screw the algorithm. I want to try something new and push myself to finish what I started. But for that, let me tell you about today's excellent sponsor. I've been using Flexispot's desks for a while now, and they have been fantastic additions to my workspace. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about my old busted chair. It's not exactly ergonomic or comfortable, and might as well be made of plywood. Luckily, Flexispot sent me their C7 ergonomic chair. First off, much like their desks, the chair was very easy to put together. Didn't even use instructions, which is always a plus. And while I was building it, I noticed quite a few features that apply very well to miniature painting. The C7 features what Flexispot calls a self-adaptive dynamic system. That means the chair adjusts to you as you move in it. The lumbar support moves with you if you lean forward, so your back is still being supported properly however you like to sit. The adjustable cushion, which has a slider that you can move forward and back and tilt forward, lets you get into a great position to get up close with a mini while painting, and more importantly, doesn't cut off your circulation. The really neat trick that this chair can pull off is that everything that can be adjusted can also be locked down, locked into place. So there's a ton of variety in how you want to sit in your chair. If you want to put your feet up and watch YouTube, you can pull out the footrest and lay back from between 90 to 128 degrees, then get right back up into the correct posture for painting. One of the most important things about a chair for most of us are the armrests. C7 has some of the best armrests in the chair game, and it makes it extremely easy to get into the perfect painting position. They move up, they move down, in and out, and rotate, so you can get into a good position with your elbows and lock down on a mini very quickly, all while maintaining good posture for those long painting sessions. This chair is built for comfort and ergonomics and can accommodate heights from 5'4" to 6'2", with a hip width of 21 inches and shoulders of 26.77. and supports up to 300 pounds. This is definitely an upgrade from my old chair, and even better is Flexispot's 30-day return policy that is paired with a 10-year warranty. So check out the link in the description or pinned comment below and use my code C730 to get $30 off of the purchase of Flexispot's C7 chair. Thanks again, Flexispot, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to that mini. This mini has already gone through quite a bit to get to this point. I stripped down the paint using my ultrasonic cleaner with LA's Totally Awesome to remove the paint. There were a few mold lines, some excess super glue that got sanded down and removed. Then I painted almost everything on the model to the point where there were just minor details left. The next step, and one that I'm still honestly pretty unsure about, is the display base. I don't tend to go for that for bases, and I didn't even start on the base when I put this model down the first time. One of the things that I like about painting competitions is how well the basing is done for even individual models. The scenes created on a display base can be pretty extraordinary, and so far above what anyone would ever do for a gaming piece that it's pretty incredible just to look at. I purchased several types of display plinths, so I would have some options. And the one I wanted to pair with this model is a square base with a backing board. I've wanted to try my hand at doing a sweet grimdark background for a while, and I've been honestly too afraid of taking that step simply because it's kind of beside the point of rescuing models, that it just doesn't really enter into the picture. And that I've never done it and I have no idea where to start. But here we are, breaking out of boxes, pushing boundaries, so let's take a crack at it and see what happens. I have somewhat of an idea going into this, and that seems like a perfectly good place to start. So I gather some materials and lay them out on the table. The idea will be to build up a small platform that's about the same size as the normal base that this model comes on. Something that feels like the right size but has those extra environmental details on it. I start by taping the base up with some masking tape just to make sure that none of the paint or glue gets on anything that we want to keep nice and clean. I don't want anything to get on the sides of the backing plate, even though, if it did, probably wouldn't be too bad to just paint everything black again. Still, it's quick and an easy step to avoid some unnecessary work later on. I've had an idea in mind for a while that I'm not 100% sure is going to work. I want to evoke that old 3rd edition Warhammer 40k rulebook cover from John Blanche, the one that I started with when I started the hobby. The painting is super iconic, and I really love the colors and grimdark aesthetic. It was my first rulebook when I got into the game, and it's still something that I take out from time to time just to look through. So something along those lines I feel like would be appropriate. The idea though is to take a piece of terrain from this basilicanum box and use it as a mask to create some cool shapes. Something that can be seen in the background and gives a little bit more feeling of depth. I have no idea if this is gonna work, how at least I'm imagining, but it's worth a shot. After all, the point of this is to try new things and find out what's gonna happen. To set up the scene, I'll start by spraying some white ink through the airbrush. This will give us some lights and darks to work with and create a frame around a focal point. Then I'll come in with some red and layer that over the white, leaving a little bit of white in the middle to help the next color stay nice and vibrant. Orange over the top of that to blend from the ground to the sky, and things are starting to look a little bit more like they're supposed to, at least in my head. Finally, I bring back some black to help with that framing, little vignette kind of thing. Now the part that could ruin the whole thing. Using some masking tape, I secure the terrain piece to the board, and I'm going to try really hard to shoot the paint directly through to avoid getting that paint everywhere. There's a bit of a gap between the backing board and the terrain that I'm using as a mask, and that's fine. I want the edges to feather out a little bit to create that sense of something being farther away, kind of blurred by the sky. So softness around the edges should actually help with that. After laying it down, I kind of like it. I think it works kind of the way I was hoping for, and it brings some visual interest. I do need to blend it into the bottom a bit more, so I went back with some browns and blacks to kind of make a little hilltop for that, building to stand on, something in the background. That's not perfect, but I think it feels appropriately grimdark and definitely gives off a cool vibe. Remember, there's no way to know how things are going to turn out if we don't just try it. And that's the whole point here. I want to try things I've never done and just create something unique. I ended up having to redo quite a lot of this paint job. I used some varnish to make it matte, and it just clouded up and had some bubbles in it. I ended up redoing this following the same steps, so it doesn't actually look that different. I wanted to filter this down and give it some painterly texture, so I ended up spraying it down with brown enamel. This really gave it that old look and made it feel like kind of an oil painting, and I really like the way that came out. For a first outing, I definitely feel like this is something I could get more into, and I wouldn't have really guessed that if I hadn't just tried it to begin with, and that alone is kind of worth it. A little brushwork with some mineral spirits to move that enamel around, and I feel like there's something here. The next step is to get those details on the actual base and blend it all together. I started by laying down some cork platforms for the Mini and sprinkling some rocks around the edges. This fills out the base and gives some great texture. The cork is, of course, cork, so I decided to cover it up with some money texture paint, and that helped it feel a lot more at home with the rocks. Before I put paint on any of these features, I decided to mask off the background. I used a glove over the top and some tape to hold those pieces down, which should help keep any excess paint from getting on that finished background. In hindsight, maybe I should have done this in the reverse order, but that's alright. From there, I covered everything in brown paint and followed it up with some burnt umber ink for the shadows. There's a lot of burnt umber in the background, and I wanted to make that transition at least keep some of those colors so it looks as natural as it can. I put in a few tufts and some dead leaves near the sticks to build up the layers of texture, lots of different things that stand out each time you look at it. Finally, I brought in some brownish red pigment powder to sell that dusty, dead look. After removing the masking glove, I fixed up the edge where the paint meets the terrain, and for now, I'm calling this done. There will be some work incorporating the Mini into this scene. There's also a lot of work to get done on that model, so that's where I need to focus my attention now. Overall, I think this will do nicely, and it does sell the vibe of that old Black Templar art. At least when I look at it as it stands, I get excited about it, and that's always a great feeling when looking at a Mini or a project. The model still needs work. There are a few things in particular that we need to take a look at. There are leather straps that I haven't even started on the model yet. More detailed work on the gold pieces is in order, and the lantern needs quite a bit to make it feel more real. The plan is to get out the paints that I used and just pick out individual pieces to focus my attention. It's a good idea to try and work on one thing until you don't know what else to do with it. That way you can let it sit for a while and look at it within the context of the entire scene and model before making more decisions. So for now, I'll start taking care of the leather straps. Back in with the dark purple brown as a base coat, and I mix in orange and off-white to give that leather some texture. There are a few straps that I almost missed here. They're pretty small, but taking a quick second look around the model, get some light in some shadowy areas revealed some extra bits of leather that needed work. The rosary beads that the model is carrying, or whatever they're actually called, need quite a bit of work. I decided to use that leather brown thinned down as a base coat over what was already there. The metallic shine on top of each bead is a nice target, and glazing this brown over the top produces a nice deep purple. And you can still see those metal highlights coming through, so we know where to aim. To break up the design, I decided on an ivory color for the smaller beads. The idea will be to use similar colors that I've already used on the model, and even though those details are super teeny tiny, I'm going to give them a shadow and a highlight of their respective colors. This brings that detail out much better, and overall I'm much happier with the results. The undersuit on the model is also in a similar state. There is a bright highlight showing on each tube, but it's not very separated from the model. Just looks like the armor. So I'm going in with a lighter gray to define those shapes and create the highlights with even a step up from that light gray. And then I'll come back in with a similar base black and glaze back in the shadows. This definitely helps get those pieces separated, and it makes a lot more sense. Probably the biggest piece of this model that I wanted to change was the lantern. I left off with a kind of muddy looking piece that didn't look like it was giving off light or warmth. There's also a decision that will need to be made about what that light is going to do to the model. I decided to liven it up a bit by adding in thin layers of red and yellow ink. The thin layers are pretty transparent too, so it saturates the lantern windows and makes them feel much more like flames. I might as well add a bit of OSL to the model as well, because this lantern is pretty bright and it would definitely cast some kind of light onto the cloth and armor. I got out the airbrush and got in there with some transparent red ink, and things are going okay. I'm not super happy with the way that this is sticking to the model, and I don't normally have any issues with this ink, but what are you gonna do? I ended up glazing in some red and yellow with a brush with the idea that I could come back in with some of the cloth color to pull it back a little bit, and eventually some shading with brown ink. All in all, I feel like I made a ton of progress on this model. I did some things I'd never done before, and I really tried to make this model better than it was before. I ended up spending quite a bit of time off camera trying to blend things together, just tons of back and forth trying to make it look right, and it's kind of boring to watch. There's so much about this model that I'm happy with, and the more that I paint, I can feel myself hitting the edge of my actual skill level, which, if I'm being honest, is exactly what I want. The entire point of painting a model to any higher level and entering a painting competition, and the reason that you should if you get a chance, is to see where you are in terms of skill level and get feedback from much better painters on where to improve. Looking at this model, I know some of those areas, but there are probably more that I'm not even aware of, and finding out what those things are will help so much in the long run. For now, I am going to enjoy putting this guy in the case and having some fun with my hobby friends. Thank you again for joining me on another miniature rescue. If you like something about this video, please consider hitting that like button, sharing it with your hobby friends, and subscribing for more miniature rescues. Once again, I'm Casey, and I will see you at Adepticon 2024. And of course, here is the finished Emperor's Champion. Thanks again.